Today's episode is brought to you by DeSanto Propane. DeSanto Propane is 4 generations strong as a trustworthy family-owned business with unmatched customer service. Go online at DeSantoPropane.com for more info or call toll-free at 1-800-752-4574. Since 1937, the difference has been DeSanto Propane. Today we continue our series previewing local elections across the Finger Lakes by catching up with one of the candidates running for mayor in Auburn. Jimmy Giannettino joins me via Zoom. Jimmy, thanks so much for being here today.
Josh, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
So let's start with this question. Why are you running for mayor?
It's a very good question. So my family in the city of Auburn has a very long history of public service. It started with my grandfather and his brothers, all veterans of World War II. My dad, my uncles, members of the military, myself and my brother, members of the military, and uncles that are public servants in the fire department and in the state police. So as you can see, public service runs through my veins. 8 years ago, let me back up a little bit. I moved back to Auburn 25 years ago after finishing my military commitment. And I've been involved in numerous boards and things like that. And 8 years ago, when I decided to run for city council, I saw that as an extension of that public service. I've enjoyed my time on city council. I am appreciative of the people of Auburn for twice electing me. It's been my honor and privilege to serve them. I feel that we've made tremendous progress. And with the announcement that Mike Quill was retiring after 16 years, 4 terms as mayor of the city of Auburn, I thought long and hard about whether or not that was something that I wanted to pursue. And it comes down to the fact that, 16 years ago, Mike Quill restored honor and integrity to City Hall by running for mayor. He's led in that manner ever since. I feel it's important to continue that. Like any community across this country, we have challenges in front of us, but we also have tremendous opportunity. And both those challenges and those opportunities require serious, level-headed leadership. And I feel that I bring that, and I feel that I have a proven track record.
When you think about your experience on city council, what stands out as maybe some of the most important moments over that time?
Sure. So when you run for local elected office, you do not ever think that you're going to encounter some of the things that I've encountered and my colleagues have encountered, not just me, in the years that I've been on city council. As you know, we have a water crisis in Owasco Lake with harmful algal blooms. We made it through a worldwide pandemic. If you would have told me 8 years ago that we were going to have to deal with a pandemic, I would have never believed that. There are severe societal issues, as I mentioned, across this country. So, we're not exempt from them, from addiction to homelessness to mental health. So, I feel that we've got a good track record of trying to address those issues. We've made significant progress. I think that's what sets us apart from the rest of the country is how we've dealt with those issues, being a small city. But at the same time, there's been tremendous investment in Auburn, both public and private. The results are undeniable if you drive through Auburn. Like I said, I moved back here 25 years ago, and the joke was there was tumbleweeds in downtown Auburn. And, Auburn's a much different place right now. And I think that the foundation of our house is very strong, and we need to continue building on that.
What are the biggest issues that you're hearing from voters as you campaign? Do they kind of marry up to what we see quite a bit in the headlines, or are there some different ones that are standing out?
I'd say that they marry up. I mentioned the issues with Owasco Lake, and to my surprise, and I was actually pleasantly surprised, as I've gone door to door, and for the record, I've knocked on 3,100 doors this election cycle. I was taken aback by the number of people that are actually concerned about the water issue. I'm sure you've seen in the last few months, we've gotten some pretty powerful headlines in what we're requesting of the state of New York, and people are paying attention to that. They're thankful for it. They understand that, you don't like to single out one issue, right? Because all the issues are important. But I think if you had to pick one, water is the number one issue, because without water, we have nothing. So folks have been positive in the sense that they're appreciative of the work that we've done, but they understand more work needs to be accomplished, and they're engaged with it. So that's been pleasantly surprising.
when we're talking about the long-term health of Owasco Lake, obviously that is a huge one for the city. What do you look as some of the next tier goals? Like, what are some of the next steps that you'd like to see the city take when it comes to protecting that health long term?
Sure. So the crisis started in 2016. That's when it came to the surface, right? We had cyanotoxins entering our drinking water. It's a problem that took decades to build up to, and it's going to take time to solve it. Collectively, local governments here were very responsive in 2016. We lobbied then Governor Andrew Cuomo for two things. The first was a stopgap measures so that we could continue to provide safe drinking water to folks. And I always tell people this to his credit. He came through with $2 million. People always talk about how slow government is. This is an example of how quick government can be. With the state coming to our aid financially, our local folks had to do the work to come up with a treatment method. And they did that in about 8 months, which is really crazy if you think about it, that it moved that fast. So that's the first thing people need to know, that the water continues to be safe to drink. The second thing we asked for was action by the state of New York for the long-term health and protection of the lake. We specifically asked for what is called a total maximum daily load. That is basically a pollution budget for a water body. It's required by law under the Clean Water Act. We've been asking for that for 7 years now, repeatedly. And repeatedly, the state has told us, no, you don't need that. Our attorneys at City Hall recently uncovered a letter from the Environmental Protection Agency that was sent to the state of New York back in October of last year, basically reaffirming everything we said, that a total maximum daily load is required by law under the Clean Water Act. So we will continue to fight for that. At the same time, we're fighting for updated rules and regulations so that we can enforce public health surrounding our drinking water. We underwent a 3-year process. It was a collective approach. We included all the stakeholders. It was a very public process. We sent those rules and regulations after 3 years of work to the state of New York. It took them 3 years to get back to us. And when they got back to us, it was basically dismantled rules and regulations. They went from 22 pages down to 9 with no explanation why. So that's part of the fight as well. We have retained attorneys through an organization known as Earth Justice, and they are assisting us in those efforts as we speak.
How much of the environmental issues connected to Owasco Lake are also infrastructure issues? Obviously, we've heard lots of headlines over this last summer, at least, communities across the region dealing with flooding from heavy rains. Obviously, heavy rains lead to more HABs in the lakes. That's no secret. How much of this becomes kind of like an infrastructure issue that cities like Auburn have to deal with, not just over the next couple of years, but probably for the next decade?
Sure. I think this summer you cannot dispute the fact that climate change is a real thing, right? And it's something that we're going to have to deal with. The unique thing about Auburn and Owasco Lake is that Auburn is not in the watershed. We're outside the watershed. The watershed itself is mostly rural. There have been, sewer infrastructure upgrades over the last couple of decades around the lake. But in terms of mitigating the effects of climate change, sure, infrastructure investments are going to have to be a part of that. We have always said we will continue to lobby the state of New York for funding to address efforts to mitigate any pollution going into the lake.
When you hear someone say, I want to shift gears here a little bit, Auburn needs more economic development, needs more business, needs more growth. Obviously, Micron for Central New York is kind of right on the horizon.
Sure.
But how do you respond to that? We need more development. And what does successful economic development look like in your vision of Auburn?
Sure. We can always use more economic development, right? More economic development means more people move to Auburn, trying to fill those jobs. I think that in my 8 years on council, I've had a very good track record in economic development. I serve on an Auburn Industrial Development Authority as a member there from City Council. We assisted Nucor Steel with a $30 million expansion. We assisted Tessie Plastic with an expansion into Auburn during COVID because they got a lucrative federal contract to make testing kits. I have proactively, as a member of City Council, engaged with and visited multiple businesses. We have to be ready for Micron. The good news is there was acknowledgement early on in the process that Onondaga County cannot absorb all that Micron's going to bring, right? Both business and people. Locally, Chairman David Gould of the Cuyahoga County Legislature, he established 4 working committees to address Micron and the opportunities that those bring. So we started immediately. We will continue that work. I'm sure you're aware that the old Bombardier site here in Auburn, it's a 15-acre site. It's the last tract of industrial land in Auburn. Got good news recently on 2 fronts. First, the state awarded us an $8.5 million Restore New York grant. I think the max we could get was 10. They awarded us $8.5 million. And ever since Bombardier was sold to Alstom has been a very good partner in discussing how to redevelop that site. We met with them several weeks ago, and I said to the gentleman from Alstom, I said, "Thank you for coming here." And he said, "Don't thank me." He said, "Thank Mike Quill. Your mayor's the one that made the phone call, made the connection, and that's why we're here." And that's the approach I'll continue to take when I'm mayor. That approach that Mike Quill has taken, that Auburn is a friendly place to live, it's a good place to live, and we're open for business.
And a big part of that living in Auburn involves housing, whether we're talking about single family development, rent prices that keep going up, overpopulation of rental properties, Airbnbs, and a lack of senior housing. There's no shortage of issues for municipalities like Auburn to try and tackle to make the housing situation better in central New York and the Finger Lakes. What are the biggest priorities in your mind, and how would you like to see the city try to tackle those in the coming years?
Yeah, so again, I think we've got a pretty good track record in the last few years in dealing with housing issues, and it's multifaceted. First, dealing with any type of neighborhood issues that pop up. We established a neighborhood cleanup crew to deal with properties that aren't being cared for, whether it's overgrown lawns or garbage in the yard, those types of things, and that's been highly successful. We also instituted a nuisance abatement committee that our police chief, fire chief, and city manager sit on. It gives residents an avenue if there's a problem property in their neighborhood to try and address those concerns. As far as new housing, market rate housing, senior housing, as I mentioned, Chairman Gould formed 4 committees. I happen to serve on the housing committee for Micron, but we view it as an extension from just Micron, dealing with housing as a whole in Auburn and Cuyahoga County. One of the things that we'd like to do is undertake a housing study. We could sit in an office and just pick what type of housing we want to pursue, but it helps to know what the demand is for, right? Historically in this country, everybody's wanted to own a home. I think people are kind of getting away from that a little bit. I think especially younger people. I think younger professionals want to live in townhouses and things like that don't take a lot of upkeep. I can tell you, my 23-year-old son moved to Nashville. I don't think he wants to own a house. He wants to live in like a townhouse type thing. So, undertaking a study to kind of see what the demand is, and pursuing every opportunity through state funding, federal funding, and the assistance that Micron's going to offer up there to pursue those types of housings. And I can tell you, in the last year, there's been significant interest by private developers in Auburn and Cuyahoga County, specifically Auburn, because the reality of it is to build housing, you need infrastructure. And we have great water and sewer infrastructure. We're investing $85 million into our wastewater treatment plant. Because it's the environmentally right thing to do, but also it's an economic development tool. You have to have capacity. If you want people to come here and live here, if you want industry to come here, you have to have those types of infrastructures.
Makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about first responders. We'll kind of break this down into groups. Sure. First, EMS service obviously has made headlines over the last week in Cuyahoga County and the Auburn area, but generally speaking, we're seeing a struggle across the board for EMS companies. Volunteer forces are down. The dollars and cents of EMS service across the region is tough. Where do you think the city stands on this front, and what do you think should be a priority over the next 2 to 4 years to maintain the service that residents of the city have come to expect?
Sure. So, as you know, we a couple years back made a decision to pursue a city-run ambulance service. That was a decision that took years to make. It was a very well-informed decision. When we made the decision at the time, we put out an RFP. There were three responses. One was from TLC, who was the then provider in the city of Auburn. One was from AMR, and one was from the city fire department. They had put together an RFP to form an ambulance service. Partway through that RFP process, AMR pulled their RFP because they realized they could not live up to what our expectations were going to be as a municipality. They did the right thing, the professional thing. They put us on notice. They said, we cannot, in good conscience, say that we can do this because we can't. So we're going to pull our RFP. The other RFP we received from TLC, I will tell you, there were 11 unanswered questions in that RFP. It should have been discounted, but we did consider it. And ultimately, we made a decision to go with a city-run ambulance service. And it has been highly successful. Have there been bumps in the roads? Bumps in the road, 100%, as there is any time you start something. But I can tell you, I've ridden with them. I can see the level of service they provide to the constituents of the city. You're right, there are challenges with EMS, but there are challenges with our healthcare system across the board. And we continue to respond to those calls and provide very good service. I know there was a letter written to Finger Lakes one that was full of inaccuracies and half-truths, and that's unfortunate. Mr. Furcano was a member of TLC. He wrote that letter. And again, it appears to me that he's trying to undermine those efforts, and that's unfortunate.
Does it feel a bit like Auburn, the city of Auburn, was ahead of the curve or ahead of its time in going this direction? Because it does appear, watching the smaller, especially the rural ambulance providers, kind of struggle to exist, that this is the direction. Municipal run ambulance service, EMS, is kind of going to be the standard here at some point. Does it feel like the city was kind of ahead of the curve on that front?
100%. When I say we, myself and city manager Jeff Digert went to NICOM last year, New York Conference of Mayors. It's held in Albany, and EMS was one of the roundtable discussions. They asked Mr. Digert to present on it, and every single municipality in that room is facing the same issues that we are, especially the smaller municipalities. So we were 100% ahead of the curve. I know that my opponent has criticized us for doing this, but the interesting thing, Josh, is there's an article, I think it was 2004, where my opponent was mayor at the time, and he actually advocated for a city-run ambulance service. So I'm glad to see that we were able to accomplish what he wasn't, and it's been highly successful.
Fire service. Okay, this is another one that it's expensive to maintain, but something that residents do expect. How do you feel like the city is situated right now with fire service, and what are the priorities over the next 5 to 10 years to make sure that you're still able to continue providing that service?
Yeah, we have a great professional fire service here. We have a very old housing stock, and people are often critical of the cost of public safety, but I say part of the reason why I live in the city limits is because of public safety. That old housing stock, when there is a fire, they become very dangerous very quickly. And our fire department has a tremendous track record of dealing with structure fires and things of that nature. We're always looking at ways to do things at a lower cost. We've been highly successful with pursuing, when I say we, I'll say the fire department and the rest of city staff. All we do is vote on those resolutions, but they've been highly successful in pursuing every federal dollar through FEMA. Right now, we have a FEMA Safer grant that is paying for firefighters to be on staff. That keeps overtime down, and those positions through attrition as people retire will phase out as that FEMA grant phases out. We built a new fire station. People had talked about doing it for decades. We got it done, and we got it done. We received $3 million in funding from the state of New York. They don't do that for building buildings anymore, but we were able to make it happen.
When you think about police service, this is another one in the city, obviously very expensive to maintain, but also very hard for law enforcement to recruit right now. How can the city best position itself on this front so that it is able to continue providing the service that residents, again, expect?
Sure. So I'll say this. When I first got elected to council, Unfortunately, the police department was in some leadership issues, and working with the union at the time, we were able to correct that. Police Chief Sean Butler was hired. He served for 5 years, and he brought a very progressive approach to policing, in a time when a lot of people unfortunately don't respect police departments, right? Um, he was very progressive. He went out and worked with the community. He has a very young police force, and built relationships. That has continued under Police Chief Jimmy Slayton. Chief Slayton, again, very progressive, very open-minded, engages with the community. We are down police officers. The positions are there; those positions exist. We like every municipality does have difficulty in filling those. Again, in taking this progressive approach, both Sean Butler and Jimmy Slayton done a good job of going out and trying to recruit, trying to educate younger folks that, the police department is there and there are openings and what the civil service process is. So we'll continue those things. The good thing is Chief Slayton actually ran the numbers, because there's been some, again, half-truths and misnomers that crime is up in Auburn, New York. Is there crime in Auburn, New York, like every community? 100%. But the police department works to curtail that. And so Chief Slayton ran the numbers from 15 years ago, which happened to be the last year that my opponent was mayor. And property crime and violent crime were double what they are now in his last year as mayor. So I just want to clear the record on that, because I know that he's telling folks that crime is out of control in Auburn, New York, and that's just not true. Are there issues? 100%. But the police department deals with those issues, and they partner with other agencies, right? It's not always a law enforcement issue. A lot of times it's mental health issues. A lot of times it's addiction issues. And both Sean Butler and Jimmy Slayton have been very good at entailing those resources to help them address these issues.
I've done over 40 of these interviews so far this cycle, and you're the first candidate to mention addiction issues in relation to their campaign and the future of law enforcement. Why is it so important to keep this issue in the forefront and not let it slip away to the back?
Because people are suffering. The addiction crisis that we face, not only in Auburn, New York, but in the United States of America, is unlike anything we've ever seen. I welcome anybody, there's a couple good documentaries on Netflix that, you should watch them, and they will open your eyes to what has been perpetuated upon the American public by big pharmaceutical. And it's the tragedy, and local governments are left to address the effects of that. Several years back, Auburn received a $10 million downtown revitalization award under then Governor Andrew Cuomo. And one of the things, and it was a public process, we got input from folks like, what do you want to see in this downtown revitalization initiative? And the topic of addiction kept coming up. And we committed $900,000 to the construction of Nick's Ride, which is an addiction clubhouse. And it was started by grassroots folks, families who had lost loved ones to addiction. And there were people in this community that criticized us and said, why are you committing $900,000 to addiction services? And our response was, how do you revitalize a city and a downtown when you have this problem in front of you? You can't ignore this problem. And it's been tremendously successful. It's been a vital tool for the police and sheriff's department, and getting folks that they're dealing with into the services that they need. This addiction crisis, like I said, is unlike anything we've ever seen. There isn't a single person I know that hasn't been impacted by this in some way or another. We're talking blue collar working folks who have lost their kids to addiction. So it needs to be at the forefront because it's a real problem, and we can't hide from it. You can't arrest your way out of it. So those efforts will continue. And we just voted last week at City Council. We had joined a couple of the opioid class action lawsuits, and we just got our first installment of funds. It was $87,000, which in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of money, but it'll help. So we awarded half of that to Nick's Ride and half of it to CHAD, which is another organization here in town that helps folks suffering from addiction.
When it comes to taxes, the question on everybody's mind is, how are you going to keep taxes low? When you get that question, when you're out on the campaign trail,
yeah.
How do you answer it?
Yeah, so it's a hard thing and it's a balancing act, right? Nobody ever wants to see their taxes go up, but you've said a couple of times people expect services, right? So it's a balancing act between providing the services that everybody relies on and paying for them in a responsible manner. Um, you know, in the last couple of years, we've been dealing with double-digit inflation. We have had tax increases, but they've been minimal. We've been able to do it, at a fraction of what inflation is. One of the challenges we face in local government is there's this funding mechanism from the state of New York that goes to most cities across the state, and it's called Aid and Incentive to Municipalities, or AIM funding. That funding has not increased in 16 years. The entire time Mike Quill's been on city council or been mayor, it has not increased. In fact, the first couple of years he was mayor, the state decreased it. We have worked with NICOM to try and get increases there. When I'm mayor, I plan to launch a aggressive campaign working with other mayors in cities across the state to put the pressure on the governor and the legislature. There are constant mandates coming from the state of New York, and we can just use $15 an hour minimum wage, right? You can make the argument that there should be a $15 hour minimum wage, but when you pass that on to a municipality, but the funding doesn't come with it, the money has to come from somewhere. So the state needs to get serious. In that same 16 years, the AIM hasn't increased. The budget, the entire budget of the state of New York has increased by $100 billion, but not one increase to AIM funding. And it's an interesting question that you bring up, because tomorrow, Mayor Quill and myself are going to Syracuse to meet with Senate Majority Leader Andrea Cousins, and that's the number one issue we're going to talk about. We need an increase in AIM funding. We saw the same thing with school districts, right? And school districts kept raising taxes because the funding wasn't coming from the state. And let's be clear, that funding coming from the state is our money coming back to us. That's all we're asking for. If there's money to build stadiums out in Buffalo, there's money to increase AIM funding.
Makes sense. Where can folks learn more about your campaign?
Well, I'm bringing it right to them. I'm knocking on their doors. There's been a lot of mail coming. I am on Facebook, Friends of Jimmy Giannettino. My cell phone number is on the city website. I welcome folks to call me directly. I'm always happy to give my time to them.
Jimmy, grateful for the time today. Thanks for taking it.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I appreciate it.
That'll do it for this edition of FLX Today. If you'd like to hear more conversations like this one, check out the show on your favorite podcast platform or subscribe to the FingerLakes1.com YouTube channel. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.